Hi, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah. I'm with the Midwest Writing Center, and this is a web series. For folks who are not familiar with Write More Light, once a week I get to interview somebody cool in the writing scene or art scene, and once a week I give short writing lessons. So that's what you're in for today, is excitingly an interview episode. At the end of the interview, I'll give you updates on the Midwest Writing Center, and then I'll send you off with a quick writing prompt. Um, So let's get to it. Today, I'm super excited to have Jason Tanamor, a Filipino-American writer and author, named one of the five best modern Filipino writers by Pinas Global newspaper, and listed as one of Positively Filipino's Phil-Ams among the remarkable and famous. Tanamor is the acclaimed author of Filipino-themed novels Vampires of Portlandia, Love, Dance, and Egg Rolls, The Legend of Sensei Tsinelas, and he was nominated for the 2024 UCLA Allegra Johnson Writing Prize and the 2024 UCLA James Kirkwood Prize. And he's been featured in several Filipino publications like Esquire Philippines, CNN Philippines, Philippine Daily Inquirer, and Asian Journal. Tanamor currently lives and works in Illinois. Um, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name. I should have asked.
No, yeah, you actually perfect.
That's near and dear to my heart
It
is
means much love. Tan amor. Amor is
that
love and tan so much. So
that's what a lovely how
yeah.
lovely.
All right.
I would I would either tell everyone all the time or tell no one. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here. I'm
Sure.
really excited for folks who maybe are watching and aren't paying attention to upcoming events at the Writing Center. Um, Jason's going to be leading a four week, I don't know what my hands are doing, 4 week workshop series for the Writing Center on fiction. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But that's one of the reasons I'm so excited is that I get to hang out with the person who's going to be doing this really kick-ass series in advance and get a little bit of intel on what to expect. But first, I'd love to talk to you about your writing
Okay.
because I think that comes first, right? Um, I'm gonna do real basic. We're gonna just baby steps up to the big questions. How did you start writing?
Well, I've always wanted to be a writer, but like every traditional Filipino kid who has immigrant parents, we were forced to go into something practical. So I didn't really know writing was something you could do for money. So I actually have a degree in accounting and something practical.
That is
But I
practical.
always wrote, but I always wrote on the side, and I always just wanted to do something creative. And I made a deal with my mom that she said, just finish your accounting degree, and if you want to fall back, if you want to pursue something, then you have something to fall back on. And that was the agreement we had. So I graduated and actually practiced as an accounting public accountant. And I did that for a little over a year. And I said, you know what? I think I'm just going to pursue what I want to do. And that's what I did. I quit my job. And I honestly, I started doing stand up for about 7 years and just started freelance writing on the side. And this was back before Google and Facebook was even around. So the major search engines were like Yahoo and Alta Vista and Ask Jeeves. So there
Dogpile.
was a very little online content that was original. And so I just started writing a humor column for this online magazine called Just Laugh, and that's kind of where I started. But I really wanted to write long form fiction. And so that's kind of what I did. And I took an online writing class with Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club. And I just kind of wanted to be a writer like him. So I took all of his lessons and wrote this novel called Anonymous that I self-published. And Publishers Weekly star reviewed it. And I was like, I made it. Of course, nothing happened out of that. And so I wrote another book based on it. And but just realized that that wasn't the type of writer I was. And so that's when I kind of transitioned into Filipino style writing. And since I did that, I felt like my career trajectory just kind of exploded from there. So
When you say style, is there tell me more about that. I that's like a pet favorite thing of mine.
so I really just write Filipino-based stories because there weren't a lot of Filipino novels and authors in the States. There are a lot that came from the Philippines, and the reality is that the Filipinos are actually the second largest Asian group in the country behind China. So like Chinese, so like every 20% of Asian community in the States is actually Filipino, but you don't see a lot of Filipino projects. So I wanted to focus on that. And there have been an explosion of kind of Filipino American authors. And so that's what I wanted to just touch base on, is that we just want to kind of give some representation of Filipinos that you kind of see in everyday life and focus on their culture and food.
Yeah, that's so important. Every once in a while, and the reason I asked the style question is every once in a while you find that the narrative structure or the whatever is just culturally is different, and that really
Mhm.
excites me. Of course, there's things like the way we structure language influences the way that we like talk about things. And that's
Mhm.
not, I mean, I'm not multilingual, so it's not really useful for me to get in on that topic, but that's a really cool thing to think about too. Um yeah, I've been really excited to see I don't want to say niche because it's really unfair. Um but like I'm second generation, so I'm like always looking for the Armenian writers everywhere. But I've been seeing yeah, lots of little pockets. It's just unfortunately the way it is of,
Mhm.
the not white authors showing up everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
it's I want to say like the last 5 years. It's been
Yeah,
just
yeah. It's been a big
awesome.
the Own Voices movement. I think kind of really hit big, and I'm glad it did. I think I kind of jumped on that little wave and is still writing it. But I try to write stories that are inclusive to everybody, but just focus on a Filipino protagonist. They go through the same problems. They go through the same
People are people.
stories that, yeah, people are people. And the new book that's coming out in May, The Legend of Sensei Chanelis. So Chanelis in Filipino is slipper. It's like, and this is actually based off a story, real life story. My father used to threaten us with his slipper to spank us. And it was we this ongoing joke between me and my brothers that he was so prolific that he could just whip it off his foot and throw it at you like a boomerang, and it would hit you and return to his hand, and he'd put it on his foot, and by the time you came to, it was like he was just like nothing happened. He was just cash eating a sandwich. And so that was kind of what the story's about. And it's just about a Filipino American kid who is dealing with cultural identity. And but one of the things he loves is Filipino food, and just based on his family. But when he was in school, he just wants to be a popular kid like anyone else and shy away from his skin until he realizes that his boss, who owns a Filipino food cart, he witnesses this like incredible thing with the slipper, and throughout the book, he just thinks that he's this superhero that's kind of like hiding himself from uh, the the city, and it's his own little project to try to you know, everybody should be knowing about the superhero. Well, coincidentally, he has to write a story, a paper, and presentation about his heritage. So he kind of uses it as a way to kind of focus on his own project selfishly, but you know, try to convince them that this is what the world needs right now. It's a superhero. So it's kind of humorous, but there's an underlying story about just kind of accepting your own identity and all that. So, and that's kind of the themes of the books that I write are people who are just kind of they're Filipino by culture, but for some reason they're always trying to shy away from it because of something looming in
Listen,
the background.
that I mean, it's not for some reason. It's the assimilation game is so hard and so real.
Yeah,
And I mean, your description was funny, but like when you're talking about like the things that humans go through, I was like, I'm on board. Like,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
I I probably need this story, right? I will make sure to have the that pre-order link in the comments
Yeah.
in the
Well,
description
and
of
I,
the
I
chat.
think it's important too because, like a lot of these real issues are very they're traumatizing, they're very hard to talk about sometimes. So I try to add a little humor in it. It's a superhero book about a kid really just trying to prove that his boss is a superhero, but he just happens to be Filipino. He's dealing with these issues kind of secondary, but it's a superhero book at heart. So every kid dreams that he's something more imaginative, but the whole premise is, he loves Superman because Superman is the greatest immigration story. It's about an
Oh,
alien who came to Smallville, Kansas in the Midwest, and when he's Clark Kent, he's essentially a nerdy nobody, but when he's the Superman, everybody loves him, and he kind of uses that as his own just way of coping with his identity. So
um, I I haven't thought about, I guess, Superman or Superman in this context in a long time, and it was just that was really heartwarming for me personally. I guess since we're on it, that falls into like several categories, right? In my mind, if I don't personally believe in genre. I get in trouble for that sometimes.
yeah.
I'm like, but good writing is good writing.
Yeah.
Um, but you have what, five, six books? You have six books, and it seems like they're
Yeah.
kind of all
They're all over the
across the
place.
genre
Yes.
spectrum, which delights me because I think a good story is a good story. Um,
Correct.
and I think that if someone's going to teach fiction, if they're like in one very specific lane, they're not going to be translating the elements necessarily in a way that's going to work for me if I'm working
Right.
over here. So can you tell me a little bit about how um I have this question written out, I'm just not reading it. Um, is the process different for writing the different genres, or like do you get an idea and you go with it and you see what happens? How does that work for you?
I do think that each genre has tropes, but I don't want to use tropes. I try to use genre conventions. So tropes are very they're very stereotypical. Genre conventions could be like, for example, when we see just when we see like the rom-coms, we know it's usually a very wealthy, typically a white woman who is kind of spoiled, and then she's forced to go into this country atmosphere or some sort of something that's not unfamiliar. And she meets a rugged guy who is in her way to do something, but he happens to be good looking, right? And
Very
then by the
convenient.
end of it, they kind of they hate each other, then they like each other, then he does the grand gesture, and then happily ever after. So there are genre conventions. And when I say tropey, I mean like when you think about like the Karate Kid and the typical mentor and protege, the tropes are always some older, wise sage who is training some young prodigy. Genre conventions kind of twist it a little bit. So you could have a wealthy, good-looking gay man who has to go in and deal with a Hispanic rugged gay person. So they're
I
still
was
genre conventions, but they're not so tropey. So when I
I
think of
said
tropey, I think of
everyone I
stereotypes.
know hello fabulous
Yeah, that's
the
such a
other
funny
day.
it's such a funny story to me. And
I
so
am
when
so
I when
excited to
I
read
when
that
I'm
one.
reading when I'm teaching fiction, I think there are still common rules when you're talking about fiction. And I think the trap that beginning writers get into is when they're writing fiction, they think it's made up. There's no rules. Well, there's still rules. There's still five narrative modes of fiction: dialogue, exposition, action, all these things that we still have to balance in time, and it's still the same act, the 4x story or 3x story, whatever you want to do. You have the intro, the exposition, and then you have the inciting incident, then you have the rising action, then the climax and the conclusion, and then you kind of settle everything at the end. So there's still that formula. So when I translate stories, whether it's a fantasy or YA or I just finished a historical fiction that I'm starting to promote, it's still the same story arc. There's still got to be a story and a character arc that work hand in hand to kind of push the story along. So what I teach is craft fiction. I kind of teach like the importance of dialogue. and how to use action and dialogue, how dialogue and scenes work together. A lot of people think that plot and story are the same thing, and they're not. Story is everything. Plot's the plot. Story includes dialogue, description, exposition, all that thing. And so these are just basic stuff that I learned. I graduated from UCLA, so I learned that. But I think a lot of beginning writers just, they, oh, stream of consciousness, and they start writing. And then next thing, whenever I critique pages, like in the first 5 or 10 pages, I can see like where you're going off track, and then usually there's two reasons why people stop reading. It's because something doesn't happen or that'll never happen. So you still, even though it's fiction, it's still got to be realistic. Even when you think of like a world like Star Wars, it's fiction, but it's realistic because people will remember those things, those little things that don't make sense. Like, there's no way, like, so I lived in Portland for a long time, and there was a show on Netflix called Trinkets. And I read the book. And if you ever watch the show on Trinkets, it's based on Lake Oswego, which is kind of, if you think about the Quad City, it's kind of like LeClaire. And then in like 5 minutes, they can get to downtown Portland. Well, if you ever lived in a big city, you're not going to Lake Oswego to downtown in 5 minutes. That's 45 minutes if you're lucky. That's like, and those are the things that people remember. Like, that doesn't make sense. You could build this incredible world as long as it's realistic, but people will never forgive you for like, there's no way you're gonna get to LeClaire and Bettendorf in 2 minutes. You got to get on the high, so there's all these things, and that's what I kind of teach. And it's, I try to build a structure and an outline where you can be flexible within that structure. So,
I was so okay. So I'm sorry to say I have not read your books, but I have read about them a lot. Um, and I lived in Seattle for 10 years, and reading your Vampires of Portland, just the description made me so happy. I was like, this is correct. And the last person I interviewed for this show talked about how one of the things that people will bring up to her about her book is that like that's an unrealistic place for an airport. And I no. So yeah, so that's something that bothers people. And I love what you
Mhm.
said about Star Wars because it doesn't really matter. I mean, I guess for somebody it matters if like the physics is right, right? Um, because the story isn't in that. The story is in the people and what the people are
Right.
doing. I think that was a beautiful point because it's not, we don't say that would never happen about Star Wars because all the human interactions are human interactions.
Right, right. And one of the basic tenets, I mean, I think people don't think about is like you have to establish this right away. You can establish something at the beginning, and as long as people understand what you're doing, they're gonna believe it. Like you don't have to tell people vampires don't like sunlight, and they sleep in coffins because it's already been established. So you can establish these things right away, and as long as you do it in a setting, in a time, and that's why each scene and chapter should be established and ground you right away. Let's get you in the scene, and then we can go from there. So that's kind of what I teach is like the right times to the jumping off points, all these things that a lot of beginning writers just think like, I'm just going to write a book, like, do you have an outline? No, I'm just going to write it. Okay, well, let me know how that works. And you hear it all the time. Oh, I stopped writing it, or I'll catch up with someone like, how's that? How did you ever finish that book? And it's almost like a joke to them, like, like because there was no plan to begin with, like you can have a story, but you still need some sort of path to get to point A to point B to point Z.
And especially with online anyway, the plotter pantser conversation, I think people are also sort of, and I'm among them, uh, just decide that like, well, that's the way it is. I'm on this side of the fence, and therefore, um, but like, there's nothing in knowing what you're doing that says that you're not also flying by the seat of your pants, right? The
Sure.
the words aren't getting written if you're not writing them, and you're not like
Yeah.
predetermining what the words are going to be just because you know the general arc of things.
Right. 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 And I think you have to have a combination of both. I'm notoriously a plotter up to about the climax. Like I know the big event's going to happen, but I try not to write past that. And when I say write past it, I'm outlining, you know, turning point. This is what's going to happen. And there's an exercise I do, in I think the third week, where it really, this is like my bread and butter exercise. This is like what really tells you if this scene should belong. And it's, we talk about emotional responses we want from the reader. We talk about the purpose of each character and the plot point. And if there's no turning point, you've seen a lot of chapters where they're just, they always say kill your darlings, like I've dumped 3,000 words before and I'm like, oh God, and I try to use it somewhere else, but you try to force it, but that's just what it is. You got to get rid of that fat and, keep that story going because I don't know how many books you stop in the middle of it. There's times I've read books and I'm like, nope, I'm done. There's way too many books to read. I'm not going to just get through it. And it's somewhere in that weird middle, that messy middle, that for some reason just gets you to that point where I'm like, you're like looking to see where the chapter ends. You start putting
Yeah.
it down, you start reading something else. It's always these excuses that happen because it's just not doing it for you.
I feel bad for people who feel like they have to finish books because if you're dreading it, you need to cut your losses.
There's a million books out there.
But yeah, it happens. And I've never stopped to think about what it is that's making me stop. And I'm going to. I'm going to now. Thank you. Because I mean, anytime you're reading, there's something that's going to help you write. And
Oh
I
yeah, yeah,
think about
absolutely.
that being one of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so I'm going to go back to genres again because you have all of them, I think. Um, I think humor is in all of them, right? Um, we've got literary, we've got psychological. Um, okay, so I'm excited about what you've listed Vampires of Portlandia as because I wouldn't know if I have genre problems even if I say I believe in
Hmm.
them. Like I don't know a lot of the time if I'm going to be talking about speculative fiction. I don't know like where the line is between the
Yeah.
things that we speculate. So you have horror, folklore, vampire, and thriller, and I'm like that filled me with delight because I saw it and I was like, I don't have to decide this is like urban fantasy or something because I don't know what urban
Yeah,
fantasy means. I know
right, right.
that I like folklore, you know?
It is all, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like when you think about like it being on a shelf, you got to think of that main one. And I think at that time in 2020, vampires were really hot at that time. So I think that's what it ended up as. But it's actually based off Filipino folklore. And, if I were to categorize it, I would probably say folklore. But it would be urban fantasy because it takes place in an actual city. But it, it really, I love that story because when I first moved to Portland, have you been to Portland when did you ever go down there? Okay, so in the fall there's all these crows roost, and that's like one of their big things, right? Because of the dynamic of the city, the water source and the vegetation, all that stuff, and thousands and thousands, a huge thing, thousands and thousands of crows roost downtown, and you could be walking downtown and see these crows on trees, on tops of buildings. And I used to work downtown, and so during the fall, when I would go into the city, because it'd be an hour commute from the burbs, and I'm walking in the dark, I would just notice these crows. And then you hear the sirens, and then you step over some thing that a homeless person left. You see the tents. So it just kind of set itself up for this weird scene anyway. Well, one day I was walking and there was a crow in a building, and a car had turned in front of me, and its headlights hit the building, hit the crow, ricocheted off something, and this crow's silhouette looked like it morphed into a human. Like it almost just like it transformed because the way it just turned. And I was like, this is crazy. And so I was watching, I digested the whole show Grimm because it was took place
I
in
love
Portland.
that show.
So Detective Wu, Sergeant Wu, played by Reggie Lee, is an actual Filipino guy, but
Man,
Wu
he
to me is
he
not
he
Filipino.
takes all the punishment in the world. That
There's
poor
one
guy.
episode where he saw Aswang, which is a Filipino boogeyman. And I'd never heard this term before. And my wife said, call your dad. So I called my dad and I asked him about it. And he said, yeah, it's just a story your grandparents told you to scare you as a kid. And so I started like researching
That's
it.
what they said on the show too.
Yeah, so I started researching it, and one of the breeds was a werebeast. It was crows, and I was like, this is the story. This is it right here. It's they all just congregated down here, and so that's kind of how the story developed. It was just about a this head vampire who fled the Philippines under tumultuous political states, and just wanted to. She had heard about Portland from a friend, and wanted to just come here and raise her family to find out, only to find out that all these other breeds had the same idea, and now they're all commingling in Portland. And the scene was just perfect. You know, the crime, the homeless population, all these things just fit into it. And that's kind of I wrote it just on my walks back and forth from the train stop to my office, because it's like I had 40 minutes on the train, and then I had another 20-minute walk from the building, and it was just like all these things going in my head, and I'm just that type of person who comes up with an idea, then the story, and then okay, this is the story, this is going to happen, and then I start writing it. I never really just start writing it because I don't want to fall into that trap that I'll just start writing it with no clear ending or no, and next thing I know I have 10,000 words, and I'm like, what the hell did I just put? It's just a waste.
You know, this isn't really anything. But I talk to a lot of people who walking is a big part of their writing practice. And so I just wanted to give that a nod, I guess.
Definitely for your mental health. I'll say that.
Yeah, I think it must be something about like you can't really multitask
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're
It's like when I read, I don't do audiobooks. I don't My wife does audiobooks. I don't do like Kindle. I have to have a physical book in my hand because that's the only thing that's occupying my time. If I try to read it on a Kindle or on my phone, I know I'm gonna put it away and start looking at something different. And if I have that book in my hand, then I at least have there's no other reason for me to look at anything else.
I panic bought myself a Nook um in March 2020. I was like,
Yeah.
I can't go to the library. Um and but it does nothing else.
Yeah.
And I use it for like library books and stuff because I write all over my books. If I get excited about my book, it's that's yeah. Can't do that on there. They have, nice features, but I'm not taking half an hour to figure out how to highlight it. I'm just not.
Right.
So it sounds like the and I'm really like excited to say this sentence, so bear with me. It's going to sound weird and cheesy. Um, and it sounds like the genre is totally secondary to the story for you, which I think is how it should be. Like the story is the story. Um, but I wanted to note that I think it's important. Like I said in the beginning, like for an instructor or someone who you're ever going to talk to about writing,
Mhm.
to be on that page and to not have that loyalty to one thing or another.
Yeah, I feel like my wife listens to fantasy a lot, and I even asked her, I said, do you feel like the storylines are a lot the same? And she said, yeah, you start seeing it, and it's again, it's these genre conventions, you expect them. You on a rom-com, you better get a grand gesture. They're going to end up together. Well, I feel like at some point that just gets to me it just gets stale, and I just have this wide interest in a lot of different types of stories. I can appreciate an American Psycho. I can appreciate something that is totally off, and that's just what my taste, and I feel like it keeps me fresh and it keeps me honest about what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree so wholeheartedly. Um, I I try like actively to read outside of my comfort zone. I mean, for one thing, I feel like I have to know what's going on locally with writing. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a book I would ordinarily pick up.
Mhm.
But also like you have to I think it's good for like your brain.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, there are a few genres where it feels I know this is true of some genres, but it certainly feels like if you don't follow this formula, then get out of here.
yeah,
And that's such a bummer because I feel like we can live in these worlds or with these environments or whatever it is, the conventions of the genre and not have to follow a formula. Of course, if somebody's comforted by that and they want to have what they're going, like they want to know what to expect. Like,
Yeah,
cool, but
right,
want to have the freedom to play.
right, exactly.
Um, okay. Um, when you are getting into a new project, what does that look like for you? I know
So,
you talked a little bit about how you plan things,
yeah, I
but
usually come up with this idea of what if this happened? What if, something happened? I have this idea for a story and I've been playing around with it. So, I grew up in this area and when Michael Jordan was huge with the Bulls, right? And then you see like LeBron James and all these things. People are always comparing them, and it's a different time. It's all these things. And I thought, like, what if there was this superhero back in the day, like Michael Jordan, who was the superhero, finally put his arch nemesis away, retires, just retires for years. And now this new blood of superheroes come, who now he's being compared. And all of a sudden, his arch nemesis gets out of prison, escapes, whatever, and he's sitting back watching this new greatest of all time superhero that he's being compared to try to get this guy and can't. And so he comes out of retirement to buddy up with this other superhero to do it, to just kind of prove it. And that was kind of my version of like whenever I have these arguments with uh kids about like no LeBron James like you haven't seen Michael Jordan, you gotta look at the stuff, and it's all a different time and all this stuff. So that's kind of what it was. And I have this idea like this retired superhero, he's just so old school that he doesn't use a GPS, he still prints out MapQuest, so like, and they're arguing about these things, like we could get him better if we had a GPS, but he's like no, this is a tried true thing where he's flipping over his MapQuest things because there's 6 pages of directions. And oh, by the way, that street doesn't exist anymore because Google doesn't tell you there's, a street or whatever. And it's just this stupid humor. And that was that's what happens. It's like I start observing these things, and then you're like, well, what happens if this? It's always those questions that isn't answered, that aren't answered. Like, wouldn't it be funny if this happened? And that's kind of how I come up with these story ideas, like Hello Fabulous, for example. So that was based off a true story. So years ago, there was a guy who looked like me roaming the Quad Cities, and this has happened more than once, and my wife has been there a few times. Even his mom mistook me for her own son. So I would be out in public, and these beautiful women would come up to me and go, "What, you can't call me anymore?" And I'm like, "I don't even know who you are." This has happened numerous times. One time, my wife and I go out to this restaurant, and the hostess walks by, sees us, and she's like, "Oh, hey." And I was like, "Who's she talking to?" We sat down and she goes, "Oh, I thought you were my son." And I said, "Let me guess, is your son's name so and so?" Because I keep getting mistaken for him. And so finally, I tracked this guy down on social media, and we finally meet. And there's a picture of us. And if you look at us, we probably don't even look a lot alike. But I posted it out on Facebook, and it was just the story that I would tell people. And that's how Hello Fabulous came about. It was basically about a guy who was very ordinary, living in the Midwest, and this flamboyant guy kind of remind me of Perez Hilton, but based off Perez Hilton. He hosts
legally
this
distinct.
this yeah, he hosts this gay event called the Flamingo. His uncle, by the way, is the mayor of Moline, so he convinces them to have it in Moline. He shows up, and everybody's like, "Oh my God!" And all of a sudden, this ordinary guy, his name is Randy Straight, by of course, his life becomes extraordinary because everybody knows who this flamboyant gay guy is. So he starts reaping the benefits of this. And that's kind of how that story came about because I kept getting recognized or mistaken for this other guy in the Quad Cities that I've lived here most of my life. I've never met him, but other people would come up to me and go, "Hey, I haven't seen you in a while. I haven't, what, it's just so weird." And
That's
that's
so
how the
weird.
stories happen. Yeah.
Wow. And you don't think you look very much alike because that's
I there
super
is a
funny.
picture where you can kind of see like like
Like
just the
broad
face.
strokes.
Like we could probably be related somehow. But when we first
The
met
same
and we're
actor would
standing
play
side
you
by
both in the
side,
movie.
probably, yeah, I could see that. I can see that. And my wife was like joking, like every time we see him, it's like he has the same haircut as you, like he's stalking you. So finally, when I met him, I said, "Yeah, I've been told that I look like you." He's like, people would come up to me and think I was you too. So it was just this weird back and forth, and it was just so funny.
It's like not
So.
even that small of a town.
No, no, and this happened over the span of almost 10 years. Like when it first happened, because it first happened before I met my wife, and then it happened during, and then like we finally met, and it's like the story that I would tell people, and all the people I would tell, I'd have to update them, like, oh my God, you're never gonna believe this. I remember this, I'd have to go back to the beginning and tell the story. We finally met.
That's amazing. I'm
Yeah.
so I'm so delighted by this. Well, I can segue into um uh what maybe I can stutter a little bit. Um what do you like about teaching?
I like seeing people get that aha moment because I remember being there very frustrated. I didn't have a formal writing background. I kind of learned things and took workshops and read and all this stuff. It wasn't until I finally decided I'm going to go to get a formal writing thing, which I think just kind of sharpened things that I've learned. But I love seeing that aha moment because I know so many people when they find out that what I do, they'll be like, oh, I was running to write a book. And then well, why don't you do it? And it's always something. It's always, well, I got a full-time job. Well, I had a full-time job. Well, I have kids. Well, I have kids, like, and I always ask the question, I'm like, are you going to drown your kids anytime soon? They're always going to be an excuse.
Hmm.
But what the underlying reason is because they get stuck somewhere or they don't know what to write about or it's hard for them. And I agree, it's hard. The worst thing I hate doing is writing the first draft. And a lot of people are like, what? I'm like, I hate writing the first draft. It's hours and hours of by myself behind a computer. I love doing stuff like this. But for me to do stuff like this, I have to do this because no one is just going to go, hey, let's just talk about stuff. You've done nothing in your life.
It's not
So
the
I have to put
14th
that
draft that
time.
you hate.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, exactly. If I have the story written down already, I'm great with that. But like I love coming up with the idea. Oh, and then this happens. So then this happens. Oh, this is great. And then you got to write it. And that is so painful. And I totally get it because you're talking 70,000 words. It's not like you're going to do it in a day. You're lucky to get 300 words a day. You're like, if you're a full-time parent,
Yeah.
worker, you're lucky to get 20 words a day sometimes. You're lucky to stay above in the black. You're lucky to stay above zero. So I totally get it. And I really think that people just don't have the structure or kind of the idea of like, what am I actually doing? Like if you really want to write, you're going to find the time to write. I just don't think that's the reason. I think it's something else, you know?
I'm so 100% with you. But for me, I think people think that I just sort of like daydream around because like this is my job, right? I get to
Yeah.
hang out with writers and talk about writing and put on writing events. So of course I'm going to be writing, but like you just have to figure out a way to prioritize it. It's
Yeah.
not it's not impossible. It's just hard.
Yeah. I will say that I because I work full time, but I get up between 3:30 and 4 a.m. every day. And I write like that's the first thing I do is I have coffee and I'm writing till almost 5:30. Almost every day. Either I'm reading, I'm writing, I'm sitting here like this, thinking about stuff. This is before my wife's up and the four cats are just kind of meandering. And a lot of times I'm just sitting there. I have four cats and two beagles. And so a lot of times I'm just sitting there. But from that time, every day, I do it. And it's just to me, it's like working out. I work out every day after I write. And if I don't do it then, I'm not going to do it. You
Yeah.
cannot convince me to go, oh no, I'll just forgo my workout every day at this time and do it after work. It's not going to happen. And I think that's the same with writing. People are like, oh, I got to write. I got to get some writing done today. And then they go to work. And then they pick up the kids. Oh, I got to make dinner. Oh, now all these things. You're not going to do it. So, it's a combination of all these things. But I really believe, though, if there's some structure and you have an idea of from how to get from point A to point B, then you're going to do it. And this is what I try to teach. You can take one class, a one-off, and you're fine. But they all link together. Some of the slides repeat because it's, they all work hand in hand and hand in hand. But if you have a basic understanding of how stories work and, why, you watch movies all the time. I watch movies and I'm like, God, I felt like that scene was way too long, and you see it all the time. Judd Apatow, he's a funny guy, but he's a horrible editor. Like, there's no reason his comedy
These are
movies are
your
2 hours
inside
and
jokes with
10
your
minutes.
friends,
Yeah, right. There's
not
no
mine.
reason I need to see home footage of your actual kids in a 2 hour and 30 minute comedy with Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler's an hour and a half, 145 if you're lucky. After that, it's so, and I think that's what people don't do. They're just writing, writing, writing. Oh, I wrote 10,000 words. Well, what happens in this 10,000 words? And
Stuff.
you ever try to get someone to tell you what their book is about? And they can't. You're like, just tell me one sentence. Just give me a pitch. Tell me what this book is about. Imagine I'm a publisher. Just tell
If
me what it's
you don't know
about.
what it's
And
about,
they don't know what it's
how am
about.
I going to
And they
know what
can't
it's
do it.
about?
They can't do it.
I used to roll my eyes at morning writers because I just struggle to wake up in the morning. But it really is the best time to do it.
I think
It
that's my sharpest. I think I can cure cancer from 3:30 to 5:30.
it took me, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I'm good at waking up. I'm not. But it took me having a dawn obligation to um to start doing it, and it's a world of difference. I kind of hate myself for saying this right now. I feel like I'm betraying some version of me that sleeps in. But and people have lots of like, they're like, oh, well, the world hasn't hit you yet or whatever. But I bet it's something really simple like this is free time.
Yeah. I love that time in the morning by myself. Nothing against my wife, but like when she's sleeping and it's just me and we don't have any kids in the house and it's just me, coffee, and then every now and again a cat will jump on my lap or I have to move it or whatever. And that blinking cursor, like that's my time. Like this is it. It's gonna get done.
So glad to know. I felt so embarrassed. I don't know if you saw, I had to mute myself for a minute because I lost cat food, wet food. And I was looking around for it and I was like, I'm gonna sound like such a weirdo because I lost cat food. Now I feel less bad about it. I also
So,
have, well, I have four cats and a bonus cat,
is that what's a bonus cat? Is that like a stray?
but
Okay.
he lives in my spare bedroom.
Oh.
Anyway, um, that's, I mean, that was everything you said, because the question was like, why do you teach? Everything you said, I feel like I learned from, which is really, really cool. So thank you. Um, you said, I mean, I'm recapping for a reason, the aha moment, but then that led to like how we get ourselves to go from I want to write to I am a writer. And I think that that's I'll say as a student, having an instructor that has that in mind that can maybe help me get there. I think that's got to be, and that's not something that I even think about when I'm signing up for a class. Of course, I'm not in that place anymore, but um, I think that must make a huge difference in like my belief in myself and my own ability to do it.
Yeah.
That's
So I teach these four separate classes all in one week at Novel Book Camp in Racine, Wisconsin in June every year. And we're at a retreat center for a week. We sleep, in the retreat center. We all eat together. We take class together. We critique each other. And I love it. And past students, they'll email me in and go like, "Hey, can you read my query letter?" And I love it. I love when they reach out. And I'll tell you when I hear like, "Oh, I got something published," that's why you do it, right? That is why you do it because I've been there. We've all been there. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever get to because the rejection is so commanding
got
in
a
this
better
business.
chance at playing professional baseball.
Yeah, it is such a small percentage. And when you finally get that one yes, like Love Dance and Angros was turned, and I tell people this, Love Dance and Angros was rejected by 79 publishers. 79. I had written it before another book and I just stopped. I'm like, I'm done. I can't handle any more rejection. I'm gonna start writing again. But in the meantime, I kept like, looking up more, and that 80th publisher did it. And the 80th publisher published it. I was doing the Portland Book Festival in November of 22 to promote it, and I went to the booth to sign all the copies that were there, and the publisher was there, and we were just talking, and she said, "Do you have anything else going on?" And I said, I have this book called about a slipper wielding superhero based off my dad. It's a very dirty draft. She said, send it to us to look at it. 80 publishers to get to yes, the next book, not even pitched it. She said, send it to us. And that second book came out with this publisher. So that's how it happened. It's like you could send it out and the first publisher can say, yeah, you could send it out, it'll never get picked up, but just keep moving on, like that's the thing. It's like people just give up. And one of my favorite lyrics is it's a Sheryl Crow lyric from Globe Sessions, and it says, "Making miracles is hard work. Most people give up before they happen." And I think it's true. It's like, I got something else to do. You really got to love what you do because this is a business model that that Warren Buffett will never promote. Like spend years of your life to make this much if you're lucky.
I feel like I wish the I'm really good at talking. Um, I wish so much that like thick skin in this way could be like not in the world. I want us to all be soft people, but in this way, some people are really hurt by the rejections, and I'm like, man, you get 100 to 1 like on a good day.
If you're lucky, yeah.
You
Some
gotta
people, like some of my in my novel book camp, they submit 25 pages to get the application to get in, and I usually read it and kind of critique it. And most of my comments, I start like, "This is just my, consider this," like you're trying to like soften the blow because these are people not getting comments like this. Usually it's their friends going, "This is great," or their mom going, "Yeah, I knew it." It's like the people that are gonna, say yes. And then that one person that says, "I don't understand what's happening here." Like you went 3 pages where nothing happened, and you're trying to say that in a way that's non-threatening or, unharmful,
Yeah,
but
not gonna make
also
them stop
like,
writing forever.
yeah, right. But also like you got to do something, like I'm not gonna say this is great, like yeah. And one comment was like, "This is very pretty language. It's very flowery, but nothing happens." Like I would omit this whole paragraph, you know.
That's
And
that's
so
the
like,
stuff I cut.
yeah, and so that's like the comments
Great
I give.
difficulty.
Right, it is. Actually, I'm not in this. I'm in this. I'm not. Yeah, the same. But I mean, there's times where I reach out to some of my past professors, and they're like, I really think you need to, I'm like, okay, I buy that. And I know that publishers are always in your best interest for the most part. So I always just, like, this isn't just my book. It's our book, like, tell me whatever comments you want. This is our book. So,
Book doula.
yeah.
Oh no, I didn't take notes. You said something I wanted to respond to. Mm, well, it's gone now. Let's go back to my other notes. Oh, I was not watching the time, so I'll try to be quick for the rest of the little bit. Um, the stuff that I think that you've chosen for the workshop, because there's 4 sessions, each is going to focus on a specific element of fiction,
Mhm.
which I want to say, anytime I get the opportunity to, I mean, that's not true. I vet the instructors a little bit. But anytime I have the opportunity to take a fiction class that looks at multiple elements, or like Dear World, anytime you get that opportunity, you
Mhm.
should take it. Um,
Yeah.
when you're taking a fiction class and it's like, I don't know, the basics of X, or how to write a great intro, or whatever it is, um, you're gonna be there are things it needs to connect to. So it's a really it's not that common an opportunity to get the opportunity, Jesus, uh, uh, to have these elements get connected for you, especially when you've already got a project going on.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
So we talked about this a little bit already. You talked about this a little bit already. That we're gonna look at plot dynamics,
Hmm.
conflicting dialogue, scene by scene. This is the title of the of each
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
Action is character. And there were two things I made note of while we were talking. Um, but I want to, if you're okay with it, go a little bit into what each of these things means, but just a
Hmm.
little bit so that you can have a life outside of the computer. Um, when we were talking about craft earlier, you said action in dialogue, and that was such a good, like I don't feel like people say that or like talk about how important that is very often.
Hmm.
So I really wanted to underscore that as a piece of your
I think
instruction.
people, so when I say action is dialogue, action is character, character is action, and character is plot, action is plot. It's all hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
I see a lot of unnecessary dialogue, and I totally get people walk in, they greet each other. We don't need to see that, And so when I say action in dialogue, you know, there's got to be some sort of reason why we're speaking. If I said, "Hey, Sarah, hey, Jason, how was your day?" Like that just gets stale, right? There's no reason you can't summarize that,
Every
and
time the characters
yeah,
meet. Yeah.
exactly. And a lot of my comments are, dramatize, don't summarize, or the opposite, summarize, don't dramatize. But and that I think it's where beginning writers get frustrated. It's like, oh, you said this here and this here, I'm like, think about it from the whole thing. When you're talking to your kid, and when you ask a kid to tell you a story, it is the most boring, and you're like, and then. So I try to challenge people instead of saying, and then this happens, and then he said this, and then so then he said this, so then this happened, so then this happened, because there's got to be, and that's part of that whole rising action. That's all action and dialogue, because you have the rising action exposition that's moving this forward, and then the dialogue is stale. So when you keep the action going, you can keep that rising action moving, and then we talk about pacing and all these things. And I'm telling you, it's a crapshoot, like sometimes things work. You read books that are like so horribly written, and you're like, how the hell did this get published? And that's a formula or calculation that I don't even have the answer to. But at least I can at least guide you a little bit on some sort of structure and the rules of craft fiction that I think that could be useful. Because you know I had a student tell she wrote me an email later and she said, I finally understand what you're talking about, because she's always been a pantser. And I'm like, you can still be a plotter, but make stuff, you can still be flexible as long as we know you're talking about it. And she finally got to that point, but the aha moment came later. I like to see it on their face, like when you get someone, in real time saying, "Oh, this is exactly what I needed," or this exercise blew my mind, or whatever. Then that's the joy that that's the whole reason why you do this is so we can be around other people like this, right? So
That's something actually that I say all the time is I can only, know this about myself, but I'm still, over 95% sure it's true of everyone that the more time we as artists spend time with other artists, the more productive we are in our
yeah,
work. I know that is true for me every single time I take a writing class, every single time I hang out with writers. Like, I don't, I mean, I live a blessed life where I do that a lot, but like mostly I, work a job and go home at night. It's,
yeah,
it's
right.
not, I'm not having salons. Um, but my not just productivity, but like the time I spend like working in my mind or working on a project increases. It doesn't like my page count or word count or whatever might not increase, but my productive time increases after I spend time with other
Mhm.
artists. That
Yeah.
is the point.
Yeah, that is exactly the point. When I did stand up, one of the most valuable times I had doing stand up was after you got off stage and you're sitting with six other comics. Yeah, that joke, that was hilarious, like rooting everyone on. That was like my favorite part, aside from telling joke, like getting an instant laugh that's one of the reasons I did it, because some of the, just it's instant. You tell a joke, they laugh, it's pretty good. You know, you write a book, 2 years later it comes out, then you read a review and you're like, yeah, it's like you're on to the next book. So,
Sure sounds glamorous when you put it that way.
I'm excited because the new book that comes out in May, the publisher's in Portland, and we have a Saturday Powell's event at the flagship downtown on a Saturday at 3 o'clock in May, and I am pumped. And I'm just like, I am so
I'm
pumped.
on my
So,
way. Yeah, no,
yeah. And that is one of the things about the Quad Cities that I kind of had a beef with. It's like, I don't want to say it's the lack of art because I do think there's a lot of art and a lot of things happening now. But for writers especially, I felt like it was a lacking. I felt like if they're around, they're hard to find, and the fact that we just have a Barnes and Noble and a BAM, we have some good used, but in Portland, it's like they're all you can just throw a rock out and there's
well,
a
we did get, I guess it's been a year now. We did get a new indie in downtown Moline, and I'm very happy about that one.
which one is that? Is it the
The Atlas Collective?
Hughes? Yeah, yeah. I haven't been there yet. Okay. And then there's one on Harrison Street too, right? Like a
Yeah,
coffee one or
Brood Book.
brewed
It's a coffee shop and
Yeah.
used bookstore.
Okay, cool, cool.
They're very cool. They're very cool. They let us host events there.
Yeah, yeah.
Atlas Collective does too. We haven't done it yet, but we have some in the works. Uh,
Nice. So I am excited. I'm hoping that there's a good turnout and
Powell's is
we can
special though.
we can get Powell's is amazing. It's that's my favorite little place to go.
Little.
Yeah, right.
I'm I like just the way that you talk about writing, the way that you talk about teaching. I'm so upset I can only go to two of your classes. I can like no, truly, I like you clearly know what you're talking about and know how to talk about it. Like you must be an excellent teacher. I'm certain of it. Um, yeah, no, I'm so bad at watching the time today. Sorry about that.
That's
Um,
right.
is there, I would love to talk more about well, anything, but your class, but is there anything that you think that we should know or prospective students should know right off the bat?
Yeah, ideally if you have something draft down, I think it'd be more beneficial because it talks about existing, exercise and stuff. But I mean, I think you get value of it if you're just trying to wanting, if you have an idea for a story. I definitely think there's value to get out of it, and I do share my slides later, um, if they ask. But it's just, it's a good resource because a lot of times it doesn't click until months later, and you're like, what was he talking about? Like, then you can kind of refer back to it. So,
Awesome. Yeah, actually we did get that question recently, so
oh,
uh
okay, cool.
awesome. Uh yeah, and I think I mean the more that we talk about it, the more that like I'm seeing my own project form in relation to what we're talking about, and
hmm
I'm not even in the class. So that's cool for me. Okay, great. Cool. I will make sure that your website, information about your books, and of course, registration for the workshop are um, on the description of this video. Um,
Awesome.
thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'm going to transition into upcoming events at the Midwest Writing Center,
Okay.
um, and then we will have a writing prompt.
Awesome.
I'm grabbing my calendar. I'm not like looking over here to psychically pick up events. It's a lot to remember. Um, okay, yeah. This Saturday, we're going to be at Ballet Quad Cities, um, writing poems and love letters on demand for donation. So go to the ballet, first of all. The Quad Cities has a professional ballet. We should be supporting the arts however we can. Ballet is telling stories. This one's going to be Carmen. Um, so yeah, we'll be in the lobby in advance of the ballet. That's at Galvin Fine Arts Center at St. Ambrose. Throw us a little bit of money and we will write a love letter to your date for you, and you will look very romantic. The Saturday show is at 7:30 p.m. The Sunday show is at 2 p.m. Um, next Thursday at the Atlas Collective, I'm going to be a friend of the Writing Center. We're going to host her for a workshop coming up here in April. Is having a book signing, reading, and um, fortune telling event. That'll be Thursday, the 27th at the Atlas Collective at 6 p.m. That's Anait Cass. We've got maybe a year ago, we did a Write More Light with her about the book when it was forthcoming. Oh gosh, its name has escaped me. So that's not great. Um, But her workshop that she'll be teaching with us is called Transmissions from the Ancestors, and it is based off the work she did for her book. Um, Coming up in March, starting March 1 and the first 4 Saturdays of March, we will have Jason Tanamor with us teaching those four elements, those four craft elements of fiction. That is 10:30 to noon at the Midwest Writing Center. The Midwest Writing Center is ground floor, Rock Island Public Library, downtown branch. Um, you already know if you watched this video that you are going to love it. Of course, we still have the Writers Studio the first and third Saturday of every month. We've got an online group and an in-person group that meet from 11 to 1. Information on all of that is also on our website. And then our next Spectra event, the Spectra reading series, is March 15th. That is the release party for the Foster Stall chapbook series. We've got two books coming out that day. One is poetry, one is essays, and they are both fantastic. I know I'm correcting the proof right now. Um, and then applications are open for can I get this? Applications are open for the Young Emerging Writers Internship Program. That is a paid summer internship, 7 weeks, for writers 15 to 19 years old. We talk about writing, we work on our writing, we learn to workshop, edit, and get published. So all awesome things. Applications are open for the Great River Writers Retreat. Those are due. I want to say May 1st. Yikes. I'm not so good on my deadlines today, but that is a fully funded writers retreat. You spend a week in the gorgeous wooded Bennett Retreat House in this sounds very silly, rural Rock Island, but you would have no idea you're in Rock Island when you're there. Um, we'll have you headline your own reading. We will do some promotion of your work, but mostly you get a week fully funded, food and board, all ready to go to work on a project that you already have in progress. And then we are still accepting submissions for the Foster Stall chapbook series. Those close on March 1st, so that's soon. So if you have a chapbook, send it in if you live in the Midwest. We do not discriminate against genre, um, so that could be you. Okay, I think that's everything. Did you, I'm sorry, I should have asked this in advance, but did you have a prompt you wanted to give, or I'm ready to go if not?
I don't. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. I didn't ask in advance. So this is a good one. I will after I say it aloud, I will give credit to the person who came up with this prompt. Because I was really excited about it and unable to do it when I found it. What we're going to do is, there we go. It is from, okay. Well, I will credit her in the I will credit her in the caption. So, write a yearbook entry that confesses the truth to high school crush, high school enemy, high school best friend. All the stuff they never knew, all the stuff you would have been mortified to say. Say it now in your version 1 voice. No word limit, no right way to do it, but you are an updated version of that high schooler. You don't have anything to hold back. Let it rip. So set a timer for 5, 10 minutes, write whatever comes. If it's poetry, if it's a journal entry, if it is formatted like a yearbook note, that would be right what you're writing in the yearbook, you're signing it. Um, if it's a short story, whatever comes, great. The idea is just to get you writing. I will credit that awesome person later. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thank you so much, Jason, for hanging out with me, and I'm really excited about your class. Um, as always, please write more light into your life.